You're listening to the audiobook version of The Life of Us We Can't Get Back by Love Kurt on Tumblr and AO3. Warnings for this chapter: fighting, homophobia, physical violence, alcoholism, anti-Semitism, disownment. I know, it's a lot. Try before you deny. 4. My executioners are here with me, walking up and down with me, washing things and packing and drinking from my bottle. They are everywhere I turn. Walls, windows, mirrors, water, the night outside. They are everywhere. Faint sunlight poured through the thin curtains of the basement window, temporarily blinding Mike as he blinked himself awake. The first thing he noticed was Will lying next to him on the pull-out sofa bed, bundled up under the quilt they shared, his back facing him. Mike let his gaze linger on Will's form for a few more seconds before he realized. He didn't panic today. He didn't wake up frantically searching for answers he'd probably never get. He was serene. Maybe this sober thing was working. It was possible for him to get better, to change, and he had Will to thank for that. As if on cue, Will inhaled sharply through his nose, murmuring a quiet, "Morning," his voice low and rough from sleep. "Good morning, my love," Mike said sweetly, and watched as Will turned his head, his beautiful green eyes crinkling at the corners. "I love when you call me that." "It's the truth," Mike replied. He let his eyes roam over Will, his defined shoulders, the toned muscles of his back visible beneath the fabric of his shirt. Will shivered as the chill of the draft seeped into his skin. He turned toward Mike with his arms outstretched, whispering, "It's fucking freezing, come cuddle." Mike wasted no time, sliding closer and wrapping an arm around Will's waist. Their faces were only inches apart, breaths mingling in the quiet tranquility of Mike's basement. He tilted his head down, brushing his lips against Will's. The kiss was slow at first, their bodies relaxing into each other, but quickly turned into something more insistent. Will melted into the kiss, his hand sliding up Mike's back. Mike slotted his thigh between Will's and kissed him a bit more open-mouthed, making Will gasp in surprise. "This doesn't feel much like cuddling," Will noted, gasping slightly when Mike only kissed him harder. "Cuddling is overrated," he countered, clearly pleased at the effect he had on his boyfriend. His hands wandered under Will's shirt, his fingertips skimming over the firm lines of his abdomen and up to his chest before removing the shirt altogether and tossing it to the side. Mike's lips traveled down Will's neck before his teeth grazed the sensitive spot just beneath the jawline. The way Will sighed, his fingers tightening against Mike's shoulders, made Mike's head spin, but then Will froze beneath him. "Mike." Mike pulled back slightly, still breathing heavily. "What?" Will was staring at him, his eyes wide, darting quickly between Mike's face and his neck. "Don't be mad at me," Will began, biting his lip as if he was trying not to laugh. Mike's stomach dropped. "What, Will? What?" Will broke into a guilty giggle. "You have a hickey the size of a ping-pong ball on your neck." Mike blinked in disbelief, his hand flying to the side of his neck. No, I don't," he squeaked, his voice an octave above his normal range. "Please don't tell me." "It's huge," Will cackled. "Oh my god," Mike groaned, dramatically flopping back onto the sofa bed and pulling the quilt over his face. "Will, I'm sorry," Will said, clearly not sorry at all as he sat up and reached for his discarded shirt. "I got carried away, okay? It happens." "How am I supposed to cover this up?" Mike's voice was muffled under the blanket. Will leaned over, tugging it away from Mike's face. "Relax. Don't move. I'm gonna go ask Nancy for some concealer. This is fixable, I promise." Mike sat up, staring at him with dread. "You sure?" "Of course." Will headed for the stairs. "Don't move, Mike." Mike listened. Well, at least he tried to, because telling Mike not to move was like telling Mike not to breathe. So he settled on a one-sided compromise, standing up from the bed and pacing back and forth over the shag rug that had most definitely seen better days. "It isn't that bad," Mike thought. "Is it? God, I wish there was a mirror down here. Then I could get a better look. What if Nancy's concealer doesn't work? What if my parents see? What if Holly sees? Oh god, I'll never be able to live this down if she notices. How long is this going to stay on my neck? I should fucking know, seeing as I've gotten way too many to count on my 2 hands alone. God, I'm such a whore. Why does Will even want me? What did I do to deserve him? I don't deserve him. I don't deserve him. I don't deserve him." "Got it," Will announced to the otherwise empty basement, and Mike turned his head to see Will standing at the bottom of the steps, concealer in hand. "I made Nancy swear not to tell anyone, and I trust her, so you're good." "Yeah, you trust her," Mike scoffed, taking a few steps over to Will in order to grab his hand and lead him back to the bed, sitting down on the edge. You didn't grow up with her. She was the queen of snitching. You probably had a lot of material for her to work off of. Mike, Will, breakfast! Karen called from upstairs. Be right up! Mike shrieked back, sounding exactly like his 12-year-old self. Will stifled a laugh behind his hand as Mike jumped into action, turning to face Will and batting his eyelashes. Quick, babe, make me a cover girl. Stat. It'd be my pleasure. Will smirked, twisting open the bottle and delicately pressing the applicator to Mike's neck. They didn't even notice Karen coming down the stairs. Michael? Mike turned around so fast he nearly gave himself whiplash. Mom, I said I'd be right. And then he saw her face. Her gaze was locked on his neck, her eyebrows arching slightly. Oh, she said, expression laced with amused understanding. Michael, your neck. Mike clamped a hand over the hickey, his face turning scarlet. Yeah, I'm sorry, Karen raised a hand to stop him. It's okay, honey. No need to be embarrassed. Her gaze flicked briefly to Will, who was suddenly very interested in the corner of the quilt. Just cover that up before your father sees, okay? Will, ever the quick thinker, grinned as he reached for the concealer. He held it up triumphantly. No worries, Mrs. Wheeler. I've got him. Covered. Mike blinked at him before bursting into laughter despite himself. Ah! You're finally becoming punny! Karen shook her head, clearly trying not to laugh herself. I'll see you two upstairs. Bacon and eggs are on the table. Thanks, Mrs. Wheeler, Will said, polite and sincere. Karen, she corrected, pausing on the stairs. Karen, Will repeated, his cheeks going a little pink. Karen gave them one last knowing look before disappearing up the stairs, leaving the basement. The moment she was gone, Mike dropped back onto the bed. Oh my god, that was so bad. Will, meanwhile, was absolutely thriving. He joined Mike on his side, poking his boyfriend's face. Are you kidding? That was amazing. I'm having the time of my life right now. Mike peeked at him through his fingers, narrowing his eyes. You're evil. I'm honest, Will shot back, laughing as he leaned over and kissed Mike's temple. Hey, I didn't take that long to start making puns, right? We've only been back together for, what, a week? 8 days, Mike corrected automatically, brushing his fingers over the back of Will's hand. He felt the roughness there, calluses from Will's new weightlifting hobby, and it made his chest ache with affection. Will raised an eyebrow. Oh, shit, sorry. That's a big difference. You're making fun of me, Mike muttered, his cheeks warming again. A big, big difference, Will pressed, his tone and eyes traveling down. Oh, Mike felt his face flush red. He was still adjusting to the newer, more sexual dynamic they had, especially when Will admired Mike's dick so often but never let Mike put it in him. Not the time. We have to be upstairs in 2 minutes, Mike rasped, counting backwards in his head, a weak effort to calm down, or my mom's gonna think we're… Doing what? Will asked innocently. Will? Mike warned, his tone sharp but his eyes betraying him. Will leaned closer, his expression shameless. I wish. Stop it, Mike whined, shoving Will lightly, though he was smiling now. I'm kidding, baby, Will said, pressing a quick, sweet kiss to Mike's lips. I love you. Mike's heart melted instantly, as it always did. I love you too. Will stood, adjusting his hair as he made his way toward the basement stairs. Before leaving, he glanced back at Mike, still sprawled on the pullout. His eyes trailed deliberately downward, and he raised an eyebrow. Come upstairs when you're… ready. Mike already knew what Will meant, but followed his gaze anyway, letting out a low groan at the sight of his tinted sweatpants. Oh, for fuck's sake. Karen rattled off a long list of instructions, standing in her highest heels in the foyer with Ted, who was adjusting his tie. Mike and Will stood by the kitchen door, nodding along as Karen tried, unsuccessfully, to maintain control of her Christmas dinner plans. You'll need to start the turkey by noon, she said, her hands fluttering nervously. And don't forget to baste it every hour, or it'll dry out. Oh, and the potatoes… Mom, Mike interrupted, holding up his hands in surrender. We've got this. Seriously. Go enjoy the luncheon. Please, Will added, stepping in to back him up. We'll take care of everything. You deserve a break. Karen hesitated, her eyes narrowing as though she didn't quite trust them. You're sure? Positive, Mike said, practically pushing her toward the door. Go. Be merry. Drink some wine. Talk about boring stuff with Dad's coworkers. We'll handle dinner. With the final wary glance over her shoulder, Karen allowed Ted to usher her out the door. As the sound of their car faded into the distance, Mike turned to Will, practically buzzing. How hard could it be? By noon, the kitchen looked like a war zone. Mike stood at the counter, staring down at Will's unfinished gravy with furrowed brows, one hand gripping a whisk like a weapon. Will, meanwhile, was elbow deep in a bowl of mashed potatoes that Mike had attempted to make. I told told you not to add so much milk, Will exclaimed, swiping at a strand of hair that had escaped his face and left a streak of potatoes across his forehead. You said they were too dry, Mike shot back, jabbing the whisk in his direction. Might I remind you, this is your recipe. My family loved it on Thanksgiving. You made my recipe on Thanksgiving? Baby, that's so sweet. Yeah, okay, it was sweet, but that's besides the point. Now I'm trying to fix it. Fix it? It's fucking soup now. Will gestured at the bowl in exasperation, and the movement knocked the bag of flour onto its side, sending a puff into the air. Mike coughed, waving it away. Well, maybe if someone didn't act like a dictator about seasoning. Oh, I'm the dictator. Will cut Mike off. This is from the guy who thinks paprika fixes everything. It does fix everything, Mike argued. Before Will could fire back, he grabbed a handful of flour from the counter and tossed it toward Will with a devilish glint in his eye. The white powder hit Will squarely in the chest, leaving him momentarily stunned. Oh, you're so dead, Will said, low and dangerous. In seconds, the kitchen descended into chaos. Flour flew through the air, potatoes splattered across the counter, and laughter echoed off the walls. Mike ducked behind the counter to dodge a handful of cranberries, only to retaliate with the smear of butter across Will's cheek. Will tackled him in retaliation, sending them both sliding across the flour-coated floor. They ended up in a heap by the fridge, both breathless and laughing uncontrollably. Will leaned back against the cabinet, wiping at the butter streak on his face. You're the absolute worst. Yeah, but you love me anyway, Mike replied. Will rolled his eyes but didn't deny it, his gaze softening as it lingered on Mike. For a moment, the world disappeared around the two of them, the chaos of the kitchen fading into the background. Will leaned in, pressing his lips to Mike's. Mike's hands moved instinctively to Will's waist, pulling him closer. The kiss was gentle at first, their laughter fading into quiet breaths. Will's hands cupped Mike's jaw, his thumbs brushing over Mike's cheeks as he deepened the kiss. Mike sighed into it, the sound low and content as he tilted his head, letting their mouths slot together perfectly, their tongues brushing together at a languid, satisfying pace. He slid his fingers up Will's back, anchoring himself. The sound of the doorbell startled both Mike and Will out of their impromptu makeout session. Mike, still dusted with flour from their food fight, glanced at Will before wiping his hands on a dish towel and heading to the door. When he opened it, his face lit up. Nana! Mike exclaimed, pulling the older woman into a hug. Hello, sweetheart, Nana Wheeler said, patting his back. Her kind eyes swept over him, noting the flour smudges on his shirt and the slight pink to his cheeks. Been busy, have you? Yeah, Mike said, rubbing the back of his neck with a sheepish grin. Just cooking Christmas dinner with Will. He paused, the words catching in his throat as his smile faltered, but only slightly. His eyes darted briefly to Will, who was standing in the hallway, watching. Best friend, he finished quietly, his eyes apologetic. He hoped that Will would know why he didn't want to come out to his grandmother. She'd raised his father, so there was no way to know whether or not she was safe. Will waved hesitantly. Hi, Mrs. Wheeler. Merry Christmas. Oh, Will, dear, call me Nana, she said, stepping forward to give him a hug. I know it's been years, but I still remember so much about you. Will blushed, glancing at Mike, who gave him a sheepish shrug. All good things, I hope. Only the best, Nana said with a wink, and Will couldn't help but relax under her kind gaze. In the living room, the three of them chatted easily, the tension from earlier forgotten. Nana settled into her usual armchair, sipping the tea Will had made for her. She asked him questions about school, his family, and how he was like in Chicago. Will answered earnestly, and Mike found himself observing the interaction with a small, fond smile. At one point, Nana turned to Mike and said, You know, Michael, you've been so much lighter these days. I think I have your special friend here to thank for that. Will turned bright red, choking on his tea. Mike spluttered, waving his hands. Nana! What? It's true, she said innocently, though there was a knowing twinkle in her eye. She reached over to pat Will's knee. I don't care what anyone says, dear. You're a lovely young man, and as long as you're good to my grandson, you'll always have a place in this family. Will looked like he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Thank you, Nana. That means a lot. Of course, she said simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Although Mike felt grateful for her approval, it was fleeting. He glanced at the clock on the wall, the hands ticking steadily toward the moment he dreaded, when Ted and Karen would walk through the door. He could almost hear the thick clack of his father's fancy-ass shoes against the floor, and feel the strain of Karen's polite attempts to keep the family from bursting into flames. The time they had left to exist in this pocket of relative calm was running out, and Mike could feel it slipping through his fingers. Mike shifted in his seat, his stomach churning as his gaze flickered toward the window, as if he might catch sight of their car pulling in. It wasn't a matter of if things would blow up. It was a matter of when. The other shoe was probably going to drop any second, and Mike didn't want to be there when it did. But he had no choice. The clock ticked on, the fragile piece growing thinner with every passing moment. Dinner began without a hitch. Karen valiantly tried to make it lively, commenting on how wonderful the mashed potatoes were, and how the paprika was a delicious little twist. Will snorted at that, earning a swift kick in the ankle from Mike. Nana asked Holly about her art. Holly yapped passionately, raving on and on about her new interest in oil paints, undoubtedly sparked by Will's influence, but her contribution to the conversation was the only bright spot in an otherwise dark cloud. Midway through the meal, Nana cleared her throat. "You know," she began, her voice calm but deliberate, "I had the most delightful chat with Michael and his special friend this afternoon. Will is such a sweet boy. It's clear how much he cares for Michael. They're good for each other." Will's cheeks flushed as he glanced down at his plate. Mike froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Nancy raised her eyebrows, her interest piqued. Holly gave Mike a very unsubtle thumbs up. "That's wonderful," Karen said cautiously. "It's nice to see Michael so happy." "Don't entertain this behavior, Mother," Ted said flatly, cutting through the fragile calm like a knife. The room fell into stunned silence. "And what behavior would that be, Theodore?" Nana asked, her eyes narrowing. "The kind where your son finds happiness with someone who clearly adores him?" Ted opened his mouth to respond, but seemed to think better of it. Instead, he shook his head and muttered something terrible under his breath, returning his attention to his plate. Mike pushed his chair back slightly, his jaw tightening. "I'm right here, you know," he muttered. "And so is Holly," Karen interjected. She glanced nervously at Holly, who was watching the argument unfold, her wide eyes focused on Mike. "We don't need to be having this discussion over the dinner table." "We do when young minds are at stake here." "Dad, are you kidding me?" Nancy leaned forward, incredulous. "Young minds? Do you even hear yourself?" "Quiet, Nancy," Ted said dismissively. "Quiet?" Nancy shouted. "You pulled the same shit during Thanksgiving. I refuse to be quiet." "Ted, Nancy," Karen warned. "Please." "No," Ted said, his gaze fixed on Nana. "This isn't something to celebrate. It's a problem." Nana straightened in her chair. "Theodore, you should be ashamed of yourself," she exclaimed. "Your son is happy, and instead of supporting him, you're sitting here sulking like a child." Ted turned to her, his face darkening. "I am not sulking, Mother. It's about principle. I will not sit here and pretend this is normal." "Normal?" Nancy scoffed. "Oh yeah, because this family is the picture of normal." "Enough," Ted said. "Michael needs to understand." Mike stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Understand what, Dad?" he snapped sharply. "That I'm a disappointment? Trust me, I got that memo years ago, loud and clear." "Michael," Ted said, low and venomous with gritted teeth. "Not now." The swoop of his thinning gray hair looked oh so pristine, combed back oh so precisely, and Mike wanted to lunge across the table and fuck it up. Maybe rip it out. Get a little follicle action if he was lucky. Mike opted to lean over the table instead, his hands flat on the tablecloth. "Why not now? You've been making this a thing the whole night. Why don't we just stop beating around the fucking bush and get it out in the open, right?" He took a wild glance around at his family, feeling almost manic in that moment as he took in their reactions to his outburst. It felt almost cathartic to see his mom's eyebrows quivering with stress, his dad's hand gripping his cloth napkin that they'd set the table with, only for special occasions, so hard that his knuckles were white. Nana's fork hovering in mid-air with her mouth slightly agape, Nancy running her hands over her eyes in exasperation. He was sure it wasn't aimed towards him. Will's eyes pleading with Mike's in all their misty green glory to please, baby, shut the fuck up. And Holly nearly vibrating in her chair because she loved a good drama. At least one person was having a good time right now. He took a deep breath. "So, to start things off, you've probably caught on by now, but I'm gonna say it anyway for the sake of formalities. Will is my boyfriend. I'm dating a man. Yeah, I know, crazy. But we're crazy together, right, Will?" "Right," Will whispered. "He's the love of my fucking life. He's the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I will spend every single day proving that to him. We spent far too long of a time being apart, and I'll be damned if I lose him again." He glanced down at Will, who was gazing up at him with a tearful smile. Mike looked back up and clapped his hands once, making everybody at the table startle. "I'm gay. Yeah, finally, I said it out loud. I'm gay. And before Will came back, I was with, wait for it, dozens of other men. He slammed a hand down on the table, meeting his father's scornful gaze and shooting an identical one right back. Dozens! Dad, how does that feel, huh? Knowing that? Ted scoffed. I knew I was right all along. He turned you into a goddamn faggot. Holly gasped, her wide, horrified eyes darting back to their father. Nancy's mouth fell open in shock. Mike's laugh was angry and sharp. It may have started with Will when I was 17 and finally sorted out my feelings, but it certainly didn't end when he left, if that's what you're implying. And he knows all of this, so. Michael, sit down. I've heard enough, Ted barked. I'm not fucking finished yet, Ted! Mike was filled with unbridled rage and wasn't planning on stopping anytime soon. Here's another thing. I failed out of college. All your hard-earned money went to waste on my bullshit degree that I don't even need. He felt righteous with this one. He knew he'd probably end up working dead-end jobs for the rest of his life anyway, as long as his book didn't get picked up. And given how little he'd written recently, the bit that was fucking legible anyway, because he couldn't fucking stop. Oh, wait! And one more fantastic development this evening. I'm an alcoholic. I drink all the time. I haven't been fully sober for 1.5 years. Karen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Holly, tears welling in her eyes, whispered, Mike. He didn't dare look at Will. The secret was finally out. But Mike couldn't stop. The words poured out of him, everything he'd bottled up for years, and it felt so goddamn freeing. How's that for your ex-golden boy, huh? Is that what you wanted to hear, Ted? That I'm broken? Because here it is, laid out on a fucking platter for you. Michael, Karen cried. Please stop! Ted's chair scraped back violently as he stood. Enough, he bellowed. I don't have to sit here and listen to this garbage. He grabbed his scotch glass and stormed out of the dining room, heading straight for his study. The slam of the door reverberated through the house, followed by the muffled clink of a bottle. Mike let out a bitter laugh, his voice shaking. Right on cue. The proud Wheeler tradition of drinking your problems away. Thanks, Dad! Michael, stop! Karen shouted, stunning everyone in the room. She stood now, reaching out to him. Please, just sit down. We can talk about this. But Mike shook his head, the adrenaline draining from his body as exhaustion took its place. What's there to talk about? He'll never change. Mike, you don't have to do this, Nancy pleaded. You don't have to fight him. Mike turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and anger. If I don't fight him, then who will? The living room was quiet after dinner. Mike and Will sat side by side on the couch, and Ted sat across the room on his lazy boy, nursing his scotch. Karen and Nancy were still in the kitchen tidying up while Nana chatted in there with them. At one point or another, Holly had retreated to her room. Mike let out a breath, trying to shake the craving away. The craving to just stand up, take a few steps forward, grab that fucking glass right out of his father's hand, and throw the rest down his throat in one go. Relish the burn. Feel his heartbeat pick up. Do it all again. He felt Will nudge his shoulder, and he turned to glance at his boyfriend, accepting the distraction and reaching for Will's hand. Mike laced their fingers together between their outer thighs in a way that felt discreet enough, giving himself away with the flush of his cheeks that accompanies Will's thumb brushing over his. For God's sakes, Michael, not in the house. Mike turned his head sharply, his hand still in Will's. What? Ted stood, swirling his glass as he stepped closer. Should Mike have felt afraid? Because he was feeling afraid. Will's grip on his hand tightened as Ted advanced. Save that for when you go back to Indianapolis. Actually, no, you're out of that apartment tomorrow. I don't care where you go. I'm not endorsing your lifestyle. Mike pulled his hand free as he stood up to face his father. Okay, that's fine. But I have a question. Why are you making it such a problem? It's a sin. It's not even your sin. It's mine. It's my life. Ted's eyes narrowed. He set his glass down on the coffee table with deliberate care, straightening to meet his son's gaze. Michael, you are not the man I thought you'd be. Mike stepped closer, his height a clear advantage as he looked down at his father. And what kind of a man is that? Clearly being one isn't enough. I gotta fuck him too. The slap came so fast that Mike barely registered it before the sharp crack echoed through the room. His head snapped to the side, his cheek instantly reddening. Mike blinked, stunned, and touched his face, his chest rising and falling in rapid breaths. Whoa, what the hell? Will shouted, leaping to his feet and putting himself between Mike and Ted. Language, both of you! Nana reprimanded from the doorway, her voice more commanding than they'd ever heard. She stepped into the room, her small frame radiating protection. "You are no longer my son," Ted said. "You are to leave first thing in the morning." His eyes flicked to Will. "And as for you, maybe this disease-addled world will take you out before Michael can do it himself." Will's expression went blank for a moment, his body stiffening like a coil pulled too tight. Then, without hesitation, he swung. His fist connected with Ted's jaw in a satisfying crack, sending him staggering back a few steps. Ted steadied himself, one hand touching his face as he stared at Will with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Why don't you go to the guest room, Mother?" Ted said loftily, his words slurring slightly as he acknowledged Nana. "This is no place for a woman." "Like hell it isn't," Nana retaliated, stepping forward and planting herself between Ted and the boys. "Theodore, you're worse than they are. Beating your son and wishing death upon his boyfriend. I raised you to be better than this." Mike stood there completely frozen. His cheek still burned, but it was nothing compared to the gnawing ache in his chest, the pricking sensation creeping along his fingertips, the slight sheen of sweat collecting along his hairline. Oh no. He looked around. Ted looked dazed. Will was focused on Ted. Nana was busy disciplining her 50-something-year-old son. "I've gotta," Mike muttered, eyes flitting around the living room until they caught the glass of scotch. It was right there. Right there. Mike reached for the glass and did what he fucking needed to do, draining the glass. Fuck, scotch was disgusting, but it would do for now. He threw the glass at the fireplace, watching it shatter into pieces against the brick surface, ignoring Nana's concerned yelp and Ted's grumble of rage and Will's "Oh my God, Mike, what was that?" as he turned on his heel and ran out of the room. "Mike, wait!" Will called after him, but Mike didn't stop. He wouldn't. He couldn't. The sound of the liquor cabinet opening and slamming shut made Will flinch. The front door made a similar sound a few seconds later. "I'm not leaving this room until you two talk it out like adults," Nana declared sternly as her eyes traveled back and forth between Will and Ted. "You had no right to speak to us like that," Will said. Ted sneered. "I gained that right when you turned Michael into a say that shit again and you'll get a black eye. This has everything to do with you two growing up together. If he hadn't met you, he'd be better off," Ted said. "Now listen." "No, you listen," Will shouted, stepping closer and cutting him off. "You may not be able to get it through that thick skull of yours, but I love Mike, and he loves me. Leaving him was the worst decision I have ever made, because, well, look at him. Oh, wait, you can't, because he just ran out of your house with whatever the hell he just took from that cabinet. He's an addict. He's going through hell, and I'm not afraid to admit that at least part of this is because of what I did." Ted scoffed again, rolling his eyes. "It's probably more so because he has shame. Spiritual conviction, if you know what that even means. Not sure what you Jews even believe." Will's entire body stiffened. "Of course you don't, because you're an ignorant asshole," he replied, cold and precise. "I'm not ignorant," Ted shot back. "I just have the facts, and the number one fact is that my son is going to die because of you." Will let out a humorless laugh, his head shaking. "Not your son, remember?" He took a step closer to Ted. "And if I'm being real with you, I've only been with one other man. I was careful then, and I'm clean. Mike would have been more likely to contract AIDS from all the other guys he was sleeping with." Ted's face twisted in disgust. "Don't try to sound all high and mighty acting like you're his savior. You're his one-way ticket to hell." Will stepped even closer, deadly calm. "I'm no savior, but I'm gonna try my damnedest to save him. I'm back, Ted, and I'm here to stay." He turned and strode toward the door, grabbing his coat. "I'm gonna go find him now. Good talk." Will stumbled into Castle Byers, the icy wind at his back. The beam of his flashlight caught a figure huddled in the corner of the ford, knees pulled to his chest. For a terrifying moment, Will thought Mike wasn't moving. Then he saw the slow, shivering rise and fall of his shoulders. "Mike?" Will's voice cracked as he stepped closer, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "Baby, what are you?" Mike's head lifted sluggishly. His eyes were red-rimmed and glassy, his face pale and blotchy from the cold and whatever tears had fallen before Will arrived. He squinted at the light. "Will? Is that you?" Will dropped to his knees, the flashlight clattering to the floor. Yeah. Yeah, it's me." His hands hovered, unsure whether to touch Mike or shake him or hold him. "Mike, oh my God. What the hell are you doing out here? It's freezing. Mike's lips curled into a lopsided, hazy grin, his words barely audible over the wind. I'm so glad you're here. I love you. Will felt his heart twist, the sheer vulnerability in Mike's voice breaking something inside him. I love you too, he whispered, his hands finally settling on Mike's arms, trying to rub warmth into his frozen skin. I'm sorry about everything that happened. I'm so sorry. Mike blinked slowly, like he was trying to focus. It's okay. It'll be okay. I'm okay. Will stared at him, his chest aching. Clearly not. Mike let out a bitter laugh, his head tilting back to rest against the wooden wall of the fort. Yeah, I fucking know that, he muttered. But if I say it out loud, I might start crying and I won't be able to stop. Will reached for Mike's hands, cradling them between his own as he leaned closer. I'm sorry, he repeated. What can I do? Tell me what to do. Mike's breath hitched, his eyes closing as his shoulders began to shake. Just hold me, he whispered, the words coming out so quietly that Will had to lean in to hear them. Hold me and tell me it'll be okay. Will nodded immediately, not even pausing to think. All right, okay. He shifted, sitting cross-legged on the freezing floor. Why don't you? Before he could finish, Mike crawled into his lap, his movements clumsy and slow. His long legs landed on either side of Will's, and the weight of him was heavy and desperate as he collapsed against Will's chest. His arms wrapped around Will's shoulders like a vice, his face burying itself in the crook of Will's neck. And then he broke. The first sob was sharp, raw, and guttural, ripping from Mike's throat like it had been trapped there for years. Will's arms came around him immediately, holding him as tightly as he could. It's okay, Will murmured, his voice thick with emotion. I've got you, baby. I've got you. But it wasn't okay. Mike's body shook violently as the dam finally burst, sobs racking his entire frame. His hands fisted in the back of Will's jacket, clutching so hard that his knuckles went white. He was gasping for air between sobs, the sound so broken that it made Will's own tears start to fall. I can't, Mike choked out, his voice muffled against Will's shoulder. I can't stop. You don't have to, Will whispered, his own voice trembling. He pressed his cheek to Mike's hair, rocking them back and forth gently. Just let it out. I'm here. Mike's sobs only grew louder, his breathing coming in short, sharp gasps that made Will's chest tighten. He could feel the tears soaking into his shirt, the rawness of Mike's pain so palpable it felt like it was bleeding into his own soul. Will pressed his lips to the top of Mike's head, his voice shaking as he whispered, I'm here. I'm here. I've got you. Mike clung to him like a lifeline, his cries turning into wails that echoed against the walls. This was not how he planned on giving Will his Christmas gift. He had wanted to make a whole night out of it. Christmas dinner, followed by a walk around the neighborhood, taking the bikes downtown, and ending the night by showcasing the new and improved Castle Byers version 2.0 TM and maybe kissing a little bit. But tonight, Mike's worst nightmare had become a reality, and he'd taken Will down with him. His words came out fragmented and barely coherent. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Will's hands moved to cup Mike's face, forcing him to look up even as tears continued to stream down his cheeks. The bitter smell of alcohol hit him fully now, and it made his stomach churn. Mike, how much did you drink? He asked. Why didn't you tell me it was this bad? Mike averted his gaze, shame written across his tear-streaked face. It's always been bad, he whispered hoarsely. I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to look at me like this. I didn't want you to leave me again. Mike, Will said, holding his boyfriend by the shoulders and lightly shaking him. He looked like he was falling asleep sitting up. You can't keep doing this to yourself. I know, Mike whispered, his lips quivering. But I don't know how to stop. Will felt a wave of fear crash over him. How deep did this addiction run? How long had Mike been drowning in it without letting anyone help him? The realization that he didn't have the answers, that Mike didn't even have the answers, terrified him. But he swallowed that fear, focusing on the one thing he could do right now. I'm not leaving you. Will shook his head, his hands cradling Mike's face again. We'll figure it out. You're not alone in this, Mike. I swear to God you're not alone. Mike's breath hitched, another sob escaping as he collapsed into Will's chest again. Don't leave me, he whispered. Please don't leave me. I'm not going anywhere, Will promised, wrapping his arms around him tightly. I've got you. I've got you. Will, Mike rasped. Sing for me. Will blinked, startled by the request. What? Small town boy, Mike murmured, his tear-streaked face tilting upward to meet Will's gaze. Please. I need to hear it. Will hesitated. He knew the song, of course. It was one of Mike's favorites, his Vecnapocalypse song. The song Will himself would cry to on nights when he missed Mike the most. Mike, he began softly, unsure if this was what Mike really needed. Please, Mike whispered. I just need to hear you. Will's throat tightened, but he nodded. He couldn't say no to him. Taking a deep breath, he let his voice fall into the familiar melody, his baritone low and unsteady at first. You leave in the morning with everything you own in a little black case. Alone on a platform, the wind and the rain on a sad and lonely face. His voice was raw, stripped of any attempt at perfection. It wasn't about sounding good, it was about saying something Mike couldn't quite put into words himself. The sadness in Mike's eyes mirrored the pain of the song. Run away, turn away, run away, turn away, run away. Mike closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks again. His shoulders shook, his hands clutching at the front of Will's jacket as though holding on to him might keep the pain at bay. Will's voice wavered slightly as he sang the chorus again, but he kept going, his arms tightening around Mike as he felt his boyfriend begin to break apart all over again. Cry, boy, cry. The words seemed to give Mike permission to do just that. He let out a shattered sob, burying his face against Will's chest as his tears fell freely. His grip on Will tightened, as though he were clinging to the only solid thing left in his crumbling world. Will rested his chin on top of Mike's head, holding him as he wept. The song was over, but its ache remained, a reminder of everything Mike had endured, and everything they still had to face together. When Mike's sobs finally subsided into quiet sniffles, he pulled back slightly, his face streaked with tears but his eyes carrying a faint glimmer of something else. Gratitude. Thank you. Will brushed his thumb gently across Mike's cheek, wiping away a tear. You don't have to thank me, he murmured. I'd sing for you every day if it made you feel even a little better. Mike let out a watery laugh, leaning his forehead against Will's. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do, Will said firmly, his hand steady against Mike's shaking frame. And I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together, okay? Mike nodded weakly, his breathing slowly evening out. The two of them stayed like that for what felt like hours, the cold seeping into their bones but neither daring to move. Mike let himself believe he wasn't alone, and Will, despite the fear clawing at him, knew he would fight like hell to make sure Mike never felt this way again. But that's not how life goes. It never does. You've been listening to the audiobook version of The Life of Us We Can't Get Back by Love Kurt on Tumblr and AO3. Stay tuned for part 5.